Hello and welcome to our special CPhI North America podcast, bringing you the very latest insights into the world of pharma supply chains. I'm Gareth Carpenter, Pharma Editor at Informa Markets, and in today's interview we're going to be talking about the use of titanium dioxide, or TiO2, and how recent concerns in Europe over its use as a food ingredient may affect its role as a vital pharmaceutical excipient. In Europe, questions have arisen about the use of nanoparticle TiO2, which has led to concerns regarding its use as an ingredient in foods, additives, and by extension, as a colour in film coating formulations for vitamin and dietary supplements, and potentially pharmaceutical products. With a regulatory ban on the use of TiO2 as a food ingredient looking likely, we're going to be asking what potential knock-on effect this could have on its use as a pharmaceutical excipient. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our guest on today's podcast, David Schoneker. David is currently the president and owner of independent consultant Black Diamond Regulatory Consulting, specialising in developing regulatory strategies related to excipients, food additives and colour additives used in drug and dietary supplement development. David was one of the original founders of the International Pharmaceutical Excipients Council and has previously served as the chairman of IPEC-Americas. He's currently a member of IPEC's Executive Committee and serves as the Vice Chair for Science and Regulatory Policy. And he's wearing his IPEC hat for this conversation today. David, thanks for joining me today.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Looking forward to discussing this fascinating topic. So, David, if we could just first of all address titanium dioxide. It's historically been used as an ingredient for foods, dietary supplements, pharmaceutical products and cosmetics. First of all, for our listeners, could you describe to us its range of applications in these different industries?
Sure. TiO2 has been safely used in all these different kinds of applications for decades, with few questions related to safety or known adverse events. It's one of the most commonly used food additives and excipients, and it's an ingredient in thousands of products that consumers and patients routinely consume every day. TiO2 has been used in both as a white pigment as well as an opacifier to enhance light stability or enhance the coloring power of other pigments in colored products. Now, TiO2 has very unique properties which make it ideal for these applications. TiO2 has been used directly in many food and cosmetic products, but it typically is used in pharmaceuticals and dietary supplements as an ingredient in coatings and printing inks that are applied to these products. Now, it's very important to stress that the opacification properties of TiO2 in pharmaceutical and dietary supplement coating applications, they make more than simply provide color to these products. TiO2 is used in coatings to provide significant light protection to many APIs that are light sensitive. And the use of these coatings is what controls the shelf life of these products and safe use by patients. This makes TiO2 a critically important excipient in many pharmaceutical and dietary supplement applications and not something which can be easily replaced.
I see. So a very wide range of applications. Now, I understand, David, there's been a lot of noise generated in Europe recently about TiO2, which is also known as E171, around its use as a food additive. Could you explain what's happened in Europe and what are the sort of chief concerns here?
Sure, be glad to. This is a bit of a long story, but I'll try to go through it so that the listeners can understand. The European Food Safety Authority, or EFSA, has been reevaluating the safety of E171, as well as many other food additives for over the last 10 or more years. In 2016, EFSA stated that there were some data gaps in the studies which needed to be filled before they could establish an acceptable daily intake, or an ADI, for E171. Now, EFSA published a call for data to industry for information to fill these gaps. However, at the time, EFSA stressed that they did not see any specific safety concerns with E171, and that E171 could continue to be used in food products, which does include food or dietary supplements, while industry provided the additional study information to fill the gaps that had been identified. Now, at this time, EFSA recognized that E171 has a number of particles in its particle size distribution below 100 nanometers, and also requested information from industry concerning what type of particle size specifications may be appropriate to describe the E171, which has been historically used in these applications. Titanium Dioxide Manufacturers Association, or known as TDMA, immediately began developing an appropriate study protocol to be able to provide EFSA with the information they requested. The study protocol was shared with EFSA, and they supported TDMA's approach. Now, in 2017, the French regulatory authority, ANSES, published information from a study which claimed that there was some absorption of TI02 in the gastrointestinal tract, which may potentially cause some safety concerns. Now, this study was very poorly designed, and the conclusions were quite questionable since previous studies had not shown this type of absorption. EFSA reviewed this study and several other studies published after their 2016 opinion, and they didn't feel that any of these studies provided a significant reason to take any action on E171. However, EFSA did request industry to add some additional assessments into the studies that were underway on E171 to answer a few of the questions brought up by France. TDMA then included these additional assessments in the studies, and EFSA continued to assess new data as it came out over the next few years and continued to state that there was no scientific or safety reason why E171 could not continue to be used. Now, unfortunately, the French government decided to use the precautionary principle to suspend the use of E171 in foods and go against the EFSA position, even though all European countries are supposed to align with EFSA's opinions on these types of scientific matters. France suspended use of E171 in food products, including food supplements, as of January 2020. France initiated political requests to the EU Commission to ban E171 for food uses throughout Europe. However, the EU Commission decided not to take this action since EFSA's opinion was that E171 was safe and that further studies simply would be needed to fill some data gaps. Now, this situation has become very controversial in Europe in the political and media arena since France's position on E171 really brings into question the entire harmonized food safety control systems that exist throughout Europe. France also published a list of 37 other food additives, which they say contain or may contain nanoparticles. They proposed that these materials should also be studied, which could result in similar actions being taken on these materials down the road. Now, while all this was going on, some new regulations and guidelines on nanomaterials were published in Europe, which will trigger deeper understanding of the impact of nanoparticles in food products in the future. However, no new information requests for E171 were provided by EFSA to TDMA, who was finishing up the requested studies. Therefore, TDMA's understanding was that the studies which were being completed would answer all the questions that EFSA had. When the studies were completed, they showed that E171 nanoparticles were not being absorbed in the gut and that there were no safety concerns identified in these studies. The study information was provided to EFSA for their review, and industry got no further feedback from EFSA. Industry was therefore expecting EFSA to publish the ADI for E171 based on all the available data. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. There was a surprise announcement from EFSA on May 6, 2021, just a couple months ago. That's why this is a hot topic. In this announcement, EFSA stated that after final review of existing safety data, they cannot rule out potential genotoxicity concerns and therefore can no longer state that E171 is safe for food uses based on the precautionary principle. Industry was shocked by this outcome, given the data that was requested and supplied. This use of the precautionary principle in this manner seems to be potentially politically motivated rather than based on good science. It appears that EFSA has applied the nanomaterial regulations and guidelines to the E171 evaluation in a way not anticipated by industry. EFSA provided no information to industry indicating that they'd be utilizing these regulations and guidelines in this manner in the way that they did.
Wow, a lot to absorb there, David. I guess my first follow-up question to this is the European Commission and Parliament expected to ban the use of E171 in food products? It seems like they are.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but yes, based on the comments made by high-level officials within the EU Commission and various parties in Parliament, it appears that the EU will probably proceed with a ban of E171 for food uses. However, the specific timing is not certain.
You mentioned about the safety concerns and the data gaps. I mean, just to clarify, have any real safety concerns been identified, or is it just a case of these data gaps existing?
Really good question. No, there have been no real safety concerns identified for the use of E171 in food or other regulated uses. EFSA even stated this in their opinion, that they didn't necessarily see a safety problem. They simply said that there are some new data gaps identified related directly to the nanoparticles present, not the E171 itself, which have come up from assessing the E171 using the new nanomaterial regulations and guidance. This EFSA opinion is really disturbing in that industry expected that EFSA would simply have requested additional studies if new data gaps were identified, rather than conclude that they can no longer consider E171 to be safe, given all of their previous opinions of E171 safety and the fact that it is used around the world with little concerns over its safety.
To dig into the weeds just a bit more, David, could you explain about the nanoparticles that exist in TI02 and why these seem to be causing concerns in Europe at this point? I mean, haven't these nanoparticles always been present in TI02, which has been safely used in, I guess, thousands of food, drug, cosmetic products, etc., for decades?
Yeah, the nanoparticles that exist in E171 are not anything new. These particles have always been present in the same quantities in the E171 that has been safely used for decades. The levels of nanoparticles present in E171 are less than 50% of the particles. So E171 doesn't even meet the EU definition of nanomaterial. Unfortunately, France appears to be overly concerned about nanomaterials, and their definition in France of a nanomaterial is anything which has more than 10% of the particles below 100 nanometers, not 50%, the way the rest of Europe considers this. E171 typically has between 30 to 40% of its particles, which are less than 100 nanometers, and most of these particles are in the 70 to 100 nanometer range. There are some other grades of TiO2 that are not typically used in foods that are typically designed to be nanomaterials, and their average particle size is in the 25 nanometer range. But these are not the pigments that everybody's talking about that are so widely used in food and drug and cosmetic products. It appears that EFSA focused, for some undefined reason, on what data existed only on the nanoparticles from 70 to 100 nanometers, and not on the data from the complete particle size distribution as exists in the actual E171 that consumers and patients are exposed to. Now, since most studies are done on the E171 itself that provides the actual exposure, there's not much data which has been developed specifically on these types of nanoparticles by themselves. This has led to the data gap that EFSA now claims provides too many uncertainties to continue to say E171 is safe. As I said before, why would this not have led EFSA to simply request this data from industry to fill these gaps rather than to publish an opinion, which will now trigger many actions which may not really be necessary for any consumer or patient safety reason?
Sounds like a good question, that one as well. This EFSA decision announcement, obviously, I think it's huge. What are the ramifications going to be of this decision and also this, well, very likely ban of TiO2's use as a food additive?
Well, you used the right word. The ramifications of this EFSA decision are huge. This approach is significantly different than how food additives have been traditionally assessed in Europe. Therefore, this decision may impact how EFSA evaluates all food additives in the future. And there are many other food additives which have portions of their particle size distribution below 100 nanometers in much the same manner as we see with E171. Could we see all of them go down the same path and potentially get banned? If so, this could be devastating, since many of these food additives are also excipients, are commonly used, and have never been seen to have caused any safety problems to actual consumers. In the E171 case, if the EU Commission and Parliament decide to ban E171 in food uses, this will impact food, dietary supplements, as well as standard foods. This will then trigger large reformulation products of thousands of products made globally for the EU market, And E171 alternatives are very limited, and some of these products will probably no longer be available in the EU, or if they are able to be reformulated, they may cost significantly more.
I see. So as things stand, this decision currently only relates to TI02's use as a food additive, but I can imagine it's bred a lot of uncertainty in pharma and cosmetic circles, which represented a lot by our audience, I think. There's obvious concern that the European Commission may at some point further down the line apply the same ban to pharma uses. What's the current scale of use of TI02 in pharma and cosmetics applications? And what impact, David, do you think such a decision would have on the pharmaceutical industry, bearing in mind that TI02 is such a popular excipient?
Yeah, there are significant concerns that this ban in foods could be extended to pharmaceuticals and cosmetics. In fact, if the EU Commission were to simply delete E171 from the list of available food colors in the EU and the listed specifications, the use of E171 in pharmaceuticals and in cosmetics would effectively be immediately banned by default because the approval of E171 for use in pharmaceuticals is cross-referenced directly to the food color list in the pharmaceutical regulations. The use of E171 in cosmetics is directly tied to the list of food color specifications, so use in cosmetics would also immediately be impacted. Now, E171, as we've been saying, is used in thousands of drug applications, and a ban in pharma would require all those products to be reformulated where possible, and I stress that where possible because it may not always be possible, and go through significant stability and validation studies and regulatory filings, which would take significant time, up to 10 years or more is the estimate from the industry. This reformulation work would also have large costs that ultimately would need to be passed on to the patients. Reformulation cost estimates that I've seen range from $600,000 to $1.8 million per product, depending on the complexity of the product. In many cases, API light stability problems will occur with many of the alternatives, which may then make certain life-saving drugs no longer available on the European market. Additionally, some companies may not see the economic viability of reformulating some of their older products or ones with small volumes, and may simply no longer supply their E171 containing drug products in Europe, which again would cause significant problems for European patients. So it's very significant.
You mentioned potential alternatives to TI02 in pharma and cosmetics applications. How viable are they? What are the challenges here? I mean, you've obviously mentioned a little bit about this. Could you go into a bit more detail there?
The bottom line is there really are no good alternatives for E171 that can be directly replaced into existing pharmaceutical and cosmetic applications due to the unique properties of E171. There are a number of alternatives that have been used in certain applications successfully, but these will not be drop-in replacements into the formulations and will not, in most circumstances, be able to provide similar performance to that of E171, especially related to light protection. To achieve similar performance to existing E171 coatings, for example, you may need to use 2 to 4 times higher weight gains or more than that than what is currently used to even get acceptable, although not equivalent, light protection for the API. Each drug or cosmetic product will need to be evaluated individually to determine what can be achieved with alternatives to E171. And this is going to be a very time-consuming activity because it's going to have to be done on an individual basis. And in some cases, it may not be successful. Potential alternatives that have been used in some cases successfully are materials such as calcium carbonate, tricalcium phosphate, isomalt, and rice starch. Now, of these, calcium carbonate probably offers the most flexibility. However, the opacity of calcium carbonate is nowhere close to that of E171.
You've mentioned before that the EFSA decision on TI02 is based on this sort of rather precautionary principle or concept. Do you think that the decision may set a dangerous precedent in that similar approaches could be taken against many other commonly used excipients that happen to have some particles in their particle size distribution which are, say, below 100 nanometers?
Absolutely. This EFSA decision on E171 sets a really dangerous precedent, and it represents a divergence from how EFSA has historically done their food assessments. As I mentioned earlier, France has already identified a list of 37 commonly used food additives that also may contain nanoparticles in their particle size distribution. And again, many of these are also excipients. This list contains more or most of the E171 alternatives that I listed before, such as calcium carbonate, tricalcium phosphate, and isomalt, but it also lists many other important food additives and excipients, such as iron oxides, silica, calcium silicate, mannitol, microcrystalline cellulose, and magnesium stearate, to name a few. These all have very significant uses as excipients in pharmaceutical applications. If additional excipients from this list were to also be banned down the road simply for having uncertainties, this would cause even greater problems for drug products than we see with E171. How will pharma companies feel if they spend years and millions of dollars reformulating many of their drug products to convert from E171 to calcium carbonate, for example, and perform the many needed studies and regulatory filings only to find out a few years down the road that EFSA also says the calcium carbonate can no longer be considered safe, and this material is also banned using the precautionary principle. This approach being taken by EFSA could ultimately cause major drug shortages throughout Europe or removal of products from the EU altogether.
Well, I can see how this is generating a lot of concern for sure. So, David, looking forward, I think the industry is very keen to know what are the next steps here. Are there any important dates to look forward to in terms of future decisions regarding TI02?
Yeah, another good question. Timing is going to be very important here. The first time that the EU Commission will be able to present a possible ban of E171 for food uses to the member states will be at a meeting in September. Now, we don't expect much to happen until then. However, if a ban is discussed at this meeting in September, it's possible that we could see a ban of E171 for food and food supplement uses by the end of this year. Various trade associations are providing information to the pharmaceutical and cosmetic regulatory agencies in Europe to try to raise awareness of how significant the issues would be for these industries and for the patients and consumers if the food ban were to be extended to pharmaceuticals and cosmetics. Our understanding at this point is that the EMA and the EU Commission are beginning to understand the difficulties in trying to implement a ban in pharmaceuticals, and that they may be trying to develop some type of a plan to avoid a major catastrophe. However, we do not know what may happen for these applications in Europe at this time. Ultimately, decisions may be made not at the Commission level, but at the Parliament level, and could have a political aspect to it. If you have an interest in this issue, I recommend that you get involved through your trade associations to try to influence the outcome. If there was a demonstrated safety concern, that would be one thing. But at this time, there is no real safety concern that has been demonstrated scientifically, just a few data gaps, which can be filled, and a lot of media and political hype that's out there.
Thank you for painting a very vivid picture of the European situation. Before we finish, David, I've got just one final question regarding the other side of the large pond. Do you have any feel for how the US FDA might feel about this precautionary opinion from EFSA? And importantly, do you anticipate any action by the FDA?
Although FDA has not provided any formal opinions about the EFSA opinion on E171, we have heard informally that FDA is discussing this internally. However, FDA is not expected to take any type of similar action because they do not make decisions based on the precautionary principle alone, the way is being done in Europe by EFSA. Based on this, we do not expect FDA to take any actions against the use of TI02 in foods, pharmaceuticals, or cosmetics in the U.S. at this time. Hopefully, this scientific approach will also be the path taken in other countries. But unfortunately, some countries tend to go along with how Europe handles things. So we could see some issues in some of these countries down the road as well. So stay tuned to see how things develop. Lots going to be happening over the coming months.
We certainly will do. David, thanks for your time, and thanks so much again for joining us. It's been really interesting.
Thank you very much.
That's it for today. To register for both in-person and online passes for our CPhI North America hybrid event, please do head to www.cphinorthamerica.com. Thanks for listening and have a pleasant day ahead.